Football's right around the corner. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. And with the NFL returning, DraftKings is giving new customers $200 in free bets instantly when you bet $1 or more on any football game. Listen up, because you don't want to miss this. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code ART19 to receive $200 in free bets when you place a $1 bet on any football game and get a free shot at $1 million top prize with your first deposit. That's promo code ART19 for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit and $1 wager required. One per customer. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT.
I tried to do some synopsis of Evan's breakdown yesterday on the show when Evan had put out on the World Herald, Omaha.com, what the committee in the NCAA baseball will be looking at, especially for the two conferences that are only playing conference-only games, and that's the MAAC and, of course, the Big Ten. And with what Evan learned about that process, we welcome Evan Bland of the Omaha World in here on the Limitless Mail Medical Hotline. Evan, first of all, great stuff there, because it was like you read my mind. I was asking the question earlier this week, how many wins does Nebraska need to, A, feel, good about possibly being one of the 64 teams? And I've seen a lot of the recent projections. They're sitting as a number 2 seed. And then, B, what does Nebraska have to do to potentially host a predetermined regional? And I would assume they got to be ranked. I would assume that they've got to find themselves in the rankings at some point. And I know you had a chance to talk to the committee chair about how they're kind of evaluating those teams that are playing conference only. So what did you learn?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I think for me, there were two things that I took away from that conversation that either I didn't realize or that I misunderstood. The first being that RPI still does play something of a factor into the discussion, even though the Big Ten and the Metro Atlantic are not playing out of conference. That doesn't mean in the committee's eyes that it's totally irrelevant. And we've heard coaches in the Big Ten say that this year, that it's a totally irrelevant metric. But in reality, the folks that are making that decision for the at-large qualifiers will still look at that to some degree. So there was a little bit of importance on that. I think the other thing that was interesting to me was the predetermined regional site process. I think it was assumed from this memo that had gone out to coaches and teams in early April that they would be assigning those regionals in the first week of May. But as it turns out, what they're doing is they're going to predetermine 20 regional sites, and of course you only end up with 16 in the tournament. And so what that does will give them a little bit of flexibility to adjust to whatever happens over the final 3 weeks of the season. So in Nebraska's case, it was assumed, I think, generally early on that, hey, if they just do pretty well these next couple of weeks, they could secure a regional, and then that's in the bag for the month of May. But really, all that they can do at this point is hope that they make that final cut of 20, and then everything's still on the line these last handful of weeks, especially that last weekend for the home series against Michigan. You still need to do well. First, you need to make the cut here in a couple of weeks, and then after that, you need to continue to perform well enough to be in the conversation at the end, and then they'll reveal those regional sites as they would at the conclusion of the regular season there at the very end of May. So just a fascinating kind of little wrinkle into how things go. I'll be interested to see if Michigan makes the cut too, and if both Nebraska and Michigan do, then boy, oh boy, that final series could not only have the Big Ten title on the line, but possibly a chance for somebody to host a regional. So it sets up to be pretty fun.
Now, will those 20 sites actually be announced before the end of the regular season? Like, kind of to your point there, will we know that if Nebraska and Michigan have maybe made that final 20 and they go into that final weekend, will we know that could be on the line?
My understanding in talking with the chair was that they would not be announcing those final 20, but the schools would know. And so I would imagine that word will get out in some form or fashion if Nebraska is in line or has made the cut, if Michigan's made the cut. So I don't think that's going to be something they'll put out officially, but I think it will be something that will be, knowledge by that point late in the season.
Evan, what did you kind of gather too as far as how the Big Ten is going to be sort of evaluated? And I know there was kind of the regional observers as well, and how that might weigh in more heavily to the Big Ten and the MAAC than other conferences. I mean, just kind of how unique is it with the Big Ten and how they will be evaluated?
Right. So while the RPI becomes less of a factor, what becomes more of a factor and what fills in that void a little bit for the Big Ten is going to be the input of these regional advisory committees. And what those are they're made up of coaches from these various conferences, and they report directly to the NCAA Division I baseball committee, and that's the one that selects the teams. And so they have 3 rounds of calls. They've already had one. They have 2 more here before the end of the season. And those coaches then inform the committee based on what they've seen, who looks good, who deserves consideration, maybe who's on the rise, who is better than the statistics say, and vice versa. And those are conversations that they have with the selection committee every year anyway. Mm-hmm. It's just that there's going to be more weight, obviously, from the Big Ten perspective. And my understanding, Nick, is that those coaches aren't necessarily known or publicly out there. And so I don't really even know which Big Ten coach or coaches has that input. So if you're Nebraska, you just want to go out and impress every weekend, because there's the potential that somebody that they have played or will play is going to be on a phone call with that selection committee, potentially with something on the line, and they're going to be listening to what that coach saw in that given weekend from Nebraska. So a little bit more, subjectivity to the thing. But I also think, and the chair said as much, that they also are going to look at other metrics other than RPI, right? They're going to look and see how well-rounded a team is. Are you solid defensively? Are you winning games, but maybe your offense is kind of poor and you're getting by in some other ways? And so I think for teams like Nebraska and Michigan especially, that plays to their favor because they're solid in all 3 phases: defense, offense, and on the mound. And so it's going to be interesting. Beyond the Big Ten, just incidentally, Fairfield out of the Metro Atlantic is the number 1 RPI team right now in the country. They're undefeated. And that's the ultimate case, I think, of how good are these guys. I mean, you have no idea. They're playing other Metro Atlantic schools. And so, Nebraska and some of the Big Ten schools aren't even Exhibit A in how challenging this thing's going to be.
Talking to Evan Bland of the Omaha World Herald here on AM 590. Evan, and I know with the player availability this week for Nebraska, all this stuff circling around them. Look, they know what their record is. They know where they stand in the Big Ten. They know the conversations of not only getting to the NCAA tournament, but also potentially having a chance to host in Lincoln, which would be the first time since 2008. How are they kind of taking everything from what you heard as this conversation, as they keep winning, gets a little bit louder and louder?
They're doing a really good job of hiding it if they're feeling any nerves, because they just seem relaxed. They seem locked in on every pitch, on every game. I've never gotten the sense that they've looked ahead or shied away from really any moment, even that 3-game losing skid they had early in the season. I mean, they bounced back from that thing and reeled off a bunch in a row. And again, you look at their numbers, and there's just not an area where you say, well, boy, they could take off if this happens, or maybe if this other thing breaks their way, they could be in good shape. Like, they're already doing it, and they've been doing it all year. I mean, the defense has been rock solid all season. The offense has scored 5 runs, I think, in 15 games straight at this point. The pitching is on as good of a run as it's been all year. They got quality starts from all 3 starters last weekend for the first time. The bullpens put up like 13 straight scoreless innings, I think, right now. So there's really not an obvious flaw. So if anything, they've been playing better as they've held the lead in the Big Ten and had that target on their backs. And a lot of that goes back to the coaching staff, certainly, and the tone they set. It goes back to these seniors, guys like Jackson Hallmark and Joe Acker and Luke Roscom and some of these guys that have really set a positive tone too. And just to their credit, like they've never really shown a sign of wobbling or letting down. And I think that the next time they do will be the first, and I'd be surprised if that happens.
And I know you didn't mention Spencer Schwellenbach. I mean, he feels like a senior, but I mean, technically he is a junior. But this is a guy, Evan, you kind of get the feeling we're probably seeing the last baseball played by Spencer, knowing the guy's hitting 99. The guy has just been unbelievable on the mound, and there's still room to grow for him, that he's probably going to get a high number in the upcoming draft. And when you kind of hear, him talk about sort of being able to separate what he's doing right now for this team and what sort of lies in the future, what are you kind of gaining from just what he has to say about, trying to balance both of those situations?
Yeah, I mean, he's a huge part, obviously, of what they do. And I think he's a fascinating example, Nick, because you hear so much about the culture and about really pretty and doing everything for the good of the team. That it's one thing, and it's probably easier if you're a freshman or if you're a guy coming off the bench. It's quite another if you're a guy with legitimate pro prospects who could go high in the draft, who is playing potentially for quite a payday here in the next few months. For him to still be a guy who's willing to lay down a sacrifice bunt, to be out, at shortstop at times, surrounded by all freshmen, and being the guy who takes control of that says a lot about a guy to sacrifice in that way, and that's helped set that tone for Nebraska to go 18-6. We've seen kind of the goofy side of Spencer. We've seen that competitive side. His story, like I wrote about today, is pretty interesting because coming out of high school, most scouts saw him as a pitcher. They didn't think he could be much of a fielder, and as his time has gone on, they said, okay, you can be a fielder, but probably not a shortstop. And now you see what he's done this year, making plays in the hole, acrobatic jumping grabs. And that's in addition to being a run producer. And now as a pitcher too, with some of his ridiculous numbers, 10 scoreless, no walks, 16 strikeouts, everything right for Nebraska. And I think when you talk about the potential for this team, what Nebraska could do the rest of this year and into the postseason, Schwellenbach embodies that, right? I mean, he could be the guy who starts in a big game for them. He can come through with the clutch hit. So he's not only helped establish this culture as one of the team's best players, but I think right now, these next couple months are going to be a ton of fun to see how he rises to the moment, and probably his best moments as a Husker, I would think, might still be ahead.
Yeah, definitely a gamer. Evan, I know you kind of take a deep look at each team that Nebraska has coming up. Michigan State, this is another interesting series that, even by winning the series, it doesn't do a whole heck of a lot for your RPI. It keeps you on top of the Big Ten standings, which is where Nebraska wants to be. But one little slip up, that can knock you down quite a few pegs. So when you do look at this Michigan State team, kind of a similar challenge that we saw last week against Penn State?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those where you got to, at the bare minimum, win 2 out of 3. These are the kind of series that give you no margin for error when you miss out on those non-conference games, because those are the games where you build up your resume. These type of series against a Michigan State team with an RPI in like the 240s, that's where it can really tank you if you lose one. And honestly, even if you win these games, it really doesn't help you. You're just trying to break even in that sense. And certainly sweeping would help Nebraska in the Big Ten race and trying to stay atop the standings and things like that. But really, if you're looking to legitimately host a regional, you can't afford to lose these kind of games this weekend. And Michigan State's risen up on occasion. It has a win over Indiana. It has beat Michigan once. Should have beaten Michigan twice, but blew a 7-run lead in the 9th last month. It's a team that has some speed, that will do some sacrificing. Don't hit for a ton of power. The pitching is not great. Defense is okay. So Nebraska has performed better. They're more talented. You just can't have a bad. Can't be jet lagged heading into East Lansing. You can't have a sleepy start to a Saturday game or something like that. And again, to Nebraska's credit, it's had very few of those anyway. So, and I think if it just continues to play the way that it has, again, at the bare minimum, Nebraska wins 2 out of 3, and you move on to some more interesting series here coming up after that.
Evan Bland on the Husker baseball and football beat for the Omaha World Herald. Evan, good stuff over the last couple of days, too, especially with baseball, the evaluation process from the NCAA committee, and also on Spencer. Appreciate you coming on, man. Enjoy the games this weekend.
Thanks, Nick. You too.